Hello, and welcome back to Culture Central. I'm your host, Hugh Kibera, alongside my fellow specialists, Vivian and Ginevra Semprini. Today, we'll be looking at the timeline of ICE raids and immigration enforcement and how they've expanded nationwide. After the government shutdown brought many federal operations to a halt, immigration enforcement quickly reemerged as one of the most active and visible federal functions. Beginning in June 2025, ICE has increased operations in major U.S. cities, sparking concern from local officials and immigration advocates. One of the earliest flashpoints was California. Beginning in June 2025, ICE conducted targeted operations that led to arrests and detentions in Los Angeles and other major metro areas. This prompted protests and statements from state and local leaders in sanctuary jurisdictions.
Unmarked cars, people en masse, people quite literally disappearing, no due process, no rights in a democracy where we have rights. Immigrants have rights.
By the fall, the focus shifted to the Midwest. In Chicago, a large-scale operation called Operation Midway Blitz involving ICE and other federal agencies resulted in hundreds of arrests. The operation moved through neighborhoods and transit areas, triggering backlash from city leaders and community groups who call the actions disruptive and dangerous.
They're the ones who are tossing tear gas when people are peacefully protesting. ICE is the one who's going into neighborhoods where they, frankly, are causing fear among people who live in those neighborhoods, work in those neighborhoods. And so they need to back off.
Now, most recently, Minnesota has become the latest epicenter. Federal officials confirmed a major ICE deployment in and around Minneapolis and St. Paul, described as one of the largest immigration enforcement operations in recent years. I'll start with you, Vivian. Looking at this timeline and how these operations have expanded city by city, what does this say about the federal government's immigration strategy, and how should state and cities be responding?
Absolutely. To start, I think this is a truly unprecedented time in the United States, especially regarding immigration policy and immigration law. Honestly, I wanted to focus on the recent murders of Alex Petty and Renee Good. There was a stark contrast with how both the federal government and local state governments reacted to that. What we saw with Alex Petty, according to an NBC article, they said that the two ICE officers that murdered him were placed on unpaid leave. Compared to the ICE agent that shot Renee Good in the face 3 times, there was no confirmation on whether he was put on leave or not. Specifically focusing on the response from both the federal government and states, I think there is a definite difference here. I think the current Trump administration, their rhetoric has been mostly supportive of ICE, even stating that they have absolute immunity when it comes to whatever they do. I would like to share a quote from White House spokeswoman, Abigail Jackson. She states that the entire Trump administration stands behind our heroic ICE officers who are conducting themselves with the utmost professionalism and integrity while making American communities safer. Clearly, we're seeing statewide protests that argue against the statement. So, and we're seeing local government officials, like we see in Minnesota, speaking out against the response from the federal government. So I think this is a truly interesting period.
Right. As federal immigration enforcement continues to operate across the country, the most harrowing flashpoint has emerged in Minnesota, where last month's raids have sparked protests and deadly violence. In early January, during a sweep by ICE and federal agents in Minneapolis, an ICE officer shot and killed Renee Nicole Good, a local resident, during an enforcement operation. An incident later ruled a homicide by medical examiners. Good's death rose tensions across the Twin Cities, with many residents condemning the force used by federal agents and calling for immediate accountability. Then on January 24th, federal agents shot and killed Alex Jeffrey Petty, a 37-year-old Minneapolis ICU nurse and U.S. citizen, during confrontations surrounding the same operation. Officials say Petty resisted and posed a threat, but bystander video and witnesses dispute that account, showing him holding a phone and moving to help other protesters before he was pepper sprayed, taken to the ground, and shot multiple times.
I don't care if you are conservative and you are flying a Donald Trump flag, you're a libertarian, don't tread on me, you're a Democratic Socialist of America. This is an inflection point, America.
So, jumping to you, Ginevra, as we've seen federal ICE operations in Minnesota escalate from raids to deadly encounters and now mass protests, how do you think this movement changes the national conversation around immigration enforcement? And if any, what pressure does it kind of put on federal leaders to reconsider how these operations are being carried out?
Well, yes, first of all, I think it puts so much pressure on not only the president, but also state governors, mayors, just because they are not putting a limit or a stop to this. So it is partially their fault that all these homicides have been happening. So I think it just puts more pressure, and this just grows into more protests, which is even more dangerous for the city. I don't think this is doing any good, and I think that the leaders will have to act fast and respond quickly so things don't worsen from here on out.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I agree. The strategy they've been doing is lawless. There's been no due process whatsoever. We are seeing footage of agents entering homes, approaching civilians at gas stations. You know, this country was built on democracy, and we are not seeing that across the nation. So, like Vivian said, we are living in some very interesting, unprecedented times.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like now we're just doing it based on looks and not based on proof anymore, when before it was, you know, you needed actual proof, but now that a U.S. citizen got shot, that's just crazy. So now we're just basing it off of looks, and it just doesn't seem, it was never fair to begin with.
I agree. For many Minnesotans and from communities across the country, this moment really isn't about politics. It's about safety, dignity, and the right to exist without fear. As federal ICE operations continue and questions around use of force and accountability remain unanswered, families are left grieving, communities are traumatized, and trust is being tested. We'll continue to follow these developments, center the voices of those most affected, and bring you verified updates as more information comes to light. That's all we have time for today. I'm Hugh Kibera for Culture Central. Thank you for tuning in, and be on the lookout for more great content.